The NFL season just wrapped up last night with the Chiefs beating the 49ers in the Super Bowl. And with that, it is unofficially basketball season. Now I know that this season started all the way back in October, but there's a lot of people who just don't really tune into the NBA very much until the NFL season wraps up in February. And with the exception of March Madness, the NBA really becomes the forefront of professional sports over the course of the next few months. For those of you who might not have been paying close attention to basketball until now, this video will cover all of the major developments and storylines from the season so far. So whether you haven't watched a second of NBA basketball this season, or you're tapped in every single night, this will paint a picture of where the league currently stands as of February 2024. Starting in the East, the most interesting team in the conference has been by far the Milwaukee Bucks. After Damian Lillard was finally traded from Portland to Milwaukee, most people expected them to be an unstoppable force and potentially run away with the East. And they were good, sitting at second in the conference, but things just seemed a little bit off about the team as a whole. From the very beginning, things just didn't seem right. For starters, assistant coach Terry Stotts quit prior to the start of the season due to disagreements with the new head coach, Adrian Griffin. This trend would only continue as the season progressed, as longtime Bucks players were frustrated with Griffin's new defensive scheme that was much different than the usual drop coverage that led Milwaukee to so much success in the past. But to be honest, I think replacing Drew Holiday, one of the best defenders of this generation, with Damian Lillard, one of the worst defenders of this generation, was much more impactful than anyone expected. On the offensive end, Lillard was also frustrated with his new role. From his new rotation in terms of playing time, the shots he was getting, to the new role of him being the definitive number 2 in the first time in about a decade, it was clear that he was not fitting in as seamlessly as everyone expected. With those factors in mind, it makes a lot more sense why the team moved on from Griffin despite their strong record. Ironically enough, the Bucks ended up choosing Doc Rivers to fill the open coaching slot. If you're familiar with my channel, you probably know my feelings about Doc Rivers. There was a comment on my Doc video that perfectly encapsulated my stance on him. Doc can't make a good team great, but Doc can absolutely make a mediocre team good. With the Bucks clearly already being a very good team, I personally don't see how he'll be able to raise their ceiling and get them over the hump to a championship. Because despite their solid numbers on offense, this team's defensive limitations are really going to hinder them in the playoffs. No example shines clearer than Tyrese Halliburton dismantling them over the course of this season, leading the Pacers to a 4-1 record against Milwaukee this year. Giannis did get one win in though, to the tune of a career-high 64 points. That night, the Pacers ended up taking the game ball for Oscar Tshiebwe, who scored his first career basket in this game. It led to absolute mayhem post-game, with Giannis and other members of the Bucks storming the Pacers' locker room to try and retrieve the ball. After injuring Indiana's GM, Milwaukee supposedly finally got the ball, but Giannis said he still isn't sure that it's the actual game ball. In terms of pure chaos and internet discussion, this night was up there with the likes of the Clippers-Rockets tunnel incident and J.R. Smith dribbling at the clock in the finals. Just absolute comedy. But to wrap this up, the Dame trade has been up and down from the start, and there are legit question marks around this team, especially with their new coach. And quickly touching on the Pacers, they're an extremely fun, fast-paced team that has seen Tyrese Halliburton emerge as a legitimate superstar this season. They even made a big trade for Pascal Siakam, so India is a legit number 2 option as well. But like Milwaukee, Indiana has been absolutely horrible on the defensive end this year, so I don't think they have what it takes to be a legit contender just yet. But I promise you, nobody will want to go against them come playoff time. Looking elsewhere in the East, Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey have been able to successfully pick up the slack after the James Harden trade, as the Sixers have firmly held the 3rd spot in the East throughout most of the season so far. Maxey is currently averaging 26 points per game, and Embiid's putting up a career-high 35 a night, and was the frontrunner for MVP. There was just no one in the league who could match up against him, which is perfectly demonstrated in his 71-point outburst a few weeks ago. However, shortly after that game, he tore his meniscus, and now has no chance to win the MVP. And this injury pretty much deflated any hope that the team had. Even with a fully healthy Embiid, it felt like they had no more than a puncher's chance to compete with the top teams in the conference. Because while Maxey's without a doubt awesome, he's still just 23 years old and isn't quite ready to be the number 2 on a championship team. And now the best case scenario for the Sixers is that Embiid is able to come back in time for the playoffs, while of course still nursing his injured knee, which doesn't give me much hope for them to get any further than the second round. When I originally began working on this video, I was going to talk about how the Knicks were a very solid team with a lot of potential, but at this point, I don't have a choice but to move them up into the top tier of the East. They traded RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley for OG Anunoby at the beginning of January, and their new forward has been a match made in heaven in Tom Thibodeau's system. This move allowed them to fully become the team that Tibbs has always wanted, which has led to them becoming statistically one of the best defenses since they made this trade earlier this year. And on top of that, Jalen Brunson has solidified himself as a legitimate star, as he's averaging about 27 points a game and became an all-star for the first time this year as well. I really do think they're the third most dangerous team in this conference, behind Boston and Milwaukee. They recently just came off a 9-game winning streak, but are dealing with the injury bug right now, as they've spent time without as much as 3 of their starters. But regardless of where they finish in the standings, as long as Jalen Brunson is available come playoff time, this team will be extremely dangerous, because he's just proven to be that good. And once again, I had to rewrite a section of this video due to the recent development of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Following a disappointing playoff upset to New York last season, the Cavs struggled out of the gate early this year, just barely hovering above 500. But ever since the turn of the new year, they've been incredible, as they've climbed all the way to the 2 seed in the East. Ironically, a lot of this has come without Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, who have both missed time with injuries. The biggest reason for this surge is that Donovan Mitchell is quite simply having the best season of his career, as he's finally committing to the defensive end for the first time, and is a legit two-way star now. At the end of the day, I would still take the Celtics, Bucks, and Knicks over them right now, but who knows, maybe they've turned their corner and are legit contenders now. Regardless, we won't know until April. Following the Cavs, we have the Miami Heat. After missing out on Damian Lillard despite it being all but guaranteed that he was going to end up there, Miami tried to compensate by recently trading for the 20-point-per-game scorer from Charlotte, Terry Rozier. Despite his big stats in Charlotte, Terry has been really struggling with the Heat thus far. This coincides with the rest of the team, who recently went on a 7-game losing streak in January. Of course, we know that none of this really matters with this team though, because at the end of the day, Terry Rozier makes this the most talented roster the Heat have ever had in the Jimmy Butler era, and we've already seen what him, Bam, and Spoelstra can do in terms of overachieving. So no matter where they finish record-wise, it's impossible to look at Miami as anything but a contender. Despite underperforming thus far, they're still the defending Eastern Conference champions, and could very well find their way back into the finals again this year. The Orlando Magic have taken the jump from mediocre to competent this season, and will likely end up in the playoffs, but their lack of outside shooting as well as inexperience is going to keep them from being taken seriously just yet. During the team's ascension, Paolo Banchero has definitely been living up to the expectations that come with being a number 1 pick, as he's already made the All-Star team in just his 2nd season. And even though Franz Wagner wasn't selected to be an All-Star, he's silently been just about as good as his teammate Paolo. While they likely won't do anything this year, don't be surprised if this team ends up in the conference finals a few years from now. Outside of the immediate playoff picture, the Eastern Conference is pretty bleak, honestly. The Bulls, Hawks, Raptors, and Nets have all been pretty incompetent one way or another, and will probably miss the playoffs even if they find their way into the play-in. Trae Young is still really good despite the All-Star snub, and Scotty Barnes has taken a bit of a leap in his 3rd season, but aside from that, there really isn't much to note. And then at the bottom of the East, the Pistons, Wizards, and Hornets are some of the worst NBA teams you'll ever see, and don't deserve to take up any of our time. So let's move on to the Boston Celtics, who have been the best team in the league so far to this point. Drew Holiday has been incredible on the defensive end, guarding literally 1 through 5 for the team, perfectly filling the void left by Marcus Smart. And then Porzingis has been the true X factor, giving them a low post presence that the team just quite simply has never had in this era. Add that to the improvements from Derek White, as well as the typical excellence from Tatum and Brown, and this team is more dangerous than ever. Of course, regular season success is nothing new for them. Postseason success isn't even new for them. The only thing left for them to do is to finish the job and win the title, which is definitely still unknown at the moment, due to their inability to execute during crunch time. They're going to be the definitive favorites heading into the postseason, but there's still one team I feel comfortable putting over them at this point in time. More on that in a few moments. Moving out to the West, we are really starting to see a changing of the hierarchy in the conference. At the top, there's currently a 4-way race between the Thunder, Timberwolves, Nuggets, and Clippers, who are all within about a game or 2 of each other in the standings. From the outside, the Timberwolves being this good is shocking considering how last year went, but those who paid close attention knew that this team could be really good. They started to figure things out in the back half of last season, and then gave the eventual champion Denver Nuggets a real test in the first round, despite missing their best perimeter defender, Jaden McDaniels. With him being back and healthy, as well as them figuring out how to properly use the double big lineup with Gobert and Cat, Minnesota has been one of, if not the best defense in the league this season. Combine that with Anthony Edwards' ascent to superstardom, and it makes a lot of sense why this team's been so good. However, their half-court offense is just a little bit clunky, which I think is going to require a couple more years of development from Anthony Edwards. Because of that, I wouldn't bank on them making a run to the finals just yet. Up next is the Oklahoma City Thunder. After narrowly missing out on the postseason last year, most people expected OKC to progress a bit and maybe snag a playoff spot through the play-in. However, Chet Holmgren has been incredibly impactful on both ends, Jalen Williams has been an awesome secondary scorer, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has become a legitimate MVP candidate, averaging over 30 points a game for the 2nd straight season. However, this team has pretty much zero playoff experience as a whole, and aren't very overwhelming in terms of their physicality. Like the Timberwolves, I still think they're another year or two away from being a legit title contender. Moving on to the Clippers, I would honestly put them as the second best team in the West at the moment. Despite the really rough 0-6 start, LA has figured things out after trading for James Harden earlier in the season, as he's been a perfect fit alongside Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, making their offense really tough to stop. I would definitely take them over the Wolves and the Thunder. The eternal question with this team remains about whether or not they're going to be healthy come playoff time, though. At the moment, everyone's healthy and the team looks really dangerous. But at the end of the day, I still don't see anyone who can take down the defending champion Denver Nuggets. Kind of like the Celtics, there isn't much that needs to be said about this team. Even though the loss of Bruce Brown does indeed hurt, Jokic is just completely on another level compared to everyone else. He's by far the best and most impactful player in the entire NBA. And with the injury to Embiid, the Joker is now the favorite to win the MVP award this season, which would put him among a very select few who have won the award 3 times. Looking at the rest of the roster, Jamal Murray still seems to be one of the best guards in the NBA when it truly matters, and Aaron Gordon, MPJ, and KCP continue to just do their jobs at a high level. There isn't a more reliable team in the NBA at this point, which is why they're my personal favorite to win it all. Those 4 teams are a tier above everyone else in the West at the moment, and it's going to be an absolute dogfight between the remaining teams to fill the final 4 spots for the playoffs. Despite both being snubbed from the All-Star game, De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis have both been outstanding this season, but Sacramento desperately needs an upgrade from Harrison Barnes to the 3 spot if they want to be taken truly seriously. They've reached a point where we can consistently expect them to make the playoffs for the foreseeable future, but we'll have to wait and see if they ever become truly elite. Even though Zion's been underwhelming this season, New Orleans has gotten it done by committee to remain a middle-of-the-pack team in the conference. And Zion hasn't been bad per se, but he has definitely not been as good as he has in previous years. I don't see them really going anywhere this year, but I'd say they're a lock to make the postseason barring any injuries. Luka Doncic has been nothing short of spectacular this season. Just a few days after Embiid dropped 71, Luka one-upped him by dropping 73 on the Hawks. This has also coincided with him averaging about a 30-point triple-double this season as well. And then despite missing some time due to injury, Kyrie Irving has been everything you could have asked for in terms of a co-star, putting up incredible stats across the board on really good efficiency. Those 2 alone make this team very scary, and could very well upset any team in the West if one or both of them get hot in the playoffs. But the supporting cast around these 2 still quite isn't good enough to seriously compete for a title at this point. As for the Suns, they've been kind of ravaged by injuries for pretty much the entire season. However, they seem to finally be rounding into form, as most of their big 3 has been healthy as of late, resulting in them playing some really good basketball. But like Dallas, the supporting cast outside of Durant, Booker, and Beal is pretty mediocre, which is why I don't think they stand much of a chance against the truly elite teams in this conference. Could either of these teams go on a run and make it to the West or even NBA Finals? Absolutely. I just don't think it's very likely at this point. Moving down the standings, the Jazz and Rockets are both currently well ahead of schedule and are somehow hovering around 500 in the gauntlet that is the West. It was rumored that Lauri Markkanen would potentially be traded earlier this year, but it looks like Utah is going to try and hold on to him and make a playoff push. I don't think they'll get in, but they'll have a chance to compete for a play-in spot at least. And for a rebuilding team, that's all you can really ask for. And looking at Houston, they've been surprisingly competent and have been much better than everyone expected. Alperen Sengun is playing at an all-star level. Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet have been solid additions. However, Jalen Green's lack of progression has noticeably hurt this team. They'll most likely continue trending downwards throughout the latter half of the season, and I'd be shocked if they ended up in the play-in. Of course, we couldn't forget about the Warriors and Lakers, who are surprisingly toward the bottom of the conference. Starting off with the Dubs, their season has been an absolute train wreck. Before anything else, Kevon Looney has seemed to have regressed, and Andrew Wiggins has completely forgot how to play basketball. On top of that, Klay Thompson appears to be aging like milk, as he's taking a very noticeable step back this year as well. And then we have Draymond Green, who has missed the majority of the season thus far, not because of injury, but because he can't stop fighting people. On November 14th, he was suspended 5 games for putting Rudy Gobert in a headlock during a scuffle, and then on December 12th, he clocked Yusuf Nurkic in the face, which got him suspended indefinitely. In his defense, Draymond has been really solid and hasn't gotten ejected since he returned on January 15th. So good for him on that front. Also, there is one bright spot in the fact that Jonathan Kuminga has developed into a great young player. But if the Warriors want any chance of playing meaningful basketball with Steph and the rest of this core, it's likely going to cost them giving up Kuminga at some point down the line to get someone who can help them a bit more right now. I really don't expect much of anything from them this year. Maybe Steph can carry them to a play-in spot, win those games, and then maybe sneak into the playoffs, but even if they did that, they'll just get thrashed by whichever team they match up against in the first round. It really looks like we're watching this dynasty crumble before our eyes. And then looking at the Lakers, they've had a really weird season. They won the inaugural in-season tournament, have a number of quality wins over teams like the Clippers, Suns, Celtics, Knicks, and Cavs, and LeBron James and Anthony Davis have both been healthy and looking great. Despite that, the team is hovering around 500 and is stuck in the play-in spots just like they were last year. Many Laker fans were calling for Darvin Ham's head as the team was struggling, but it looks like he'll at the very least finish this season as the coach. If you ask me, I think it's pretty obvious that the team picks and chooses the nights when they want to show up, as their effort just seems to be really up and down depending on who they play. They're likely going to end up in the same exact spot they were last year, having to get out of the play-in and then face off against a young, inexperienced team in the first round. Honestly, I think they definitely have what it takes to upset the Thunder or the Timberwolves, if that's who they match up against. Because no matter where they end up in the standings, last year showed us that LeBron James and Anthony Davis are extremely tough to beat when both healthy. And then as a quick rapid fire for the remaining teams in the West, the Grizzlies have been utterly decimated by injuries and Ja Morant's suspension. Victor Wembanyama has been literally the only redeeming quality about the Spurs this season, and the Trailblazers are just utterly irrelevant since the Dame trade. And that is at a high level a broad strokes picture of everything you miss while watching football. Of course, I couldn't cover every single thing that's happened this season, but this should get you up to speed on where the league's at overall. I think it's been a really entertaining year, as there are once again at least a handful of teams around the league who have a real chance of winning the title this season. Let me know who you guys think is going to come out of each conference in the comments below. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video.